So put away all malice, and all deceit, and hypocrisy, and envy, and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation. If indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good, as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as spiritual house, to be a priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Apocrypha Talks. I'm your host, Bradley McDonald, and this podcast, the theme is the necessity of God and fighting injustice. But before we get into the podcast, I want to make everyone aware that I finally paid for the app to produce this podcast. So this podcast is going to be a little bit longer than what it has been before. And we're going to play by ear how long these podcasts are going to be. But I hope they're not going to be terribly too long. I'm expecting it to be about 30 to 45 minutes long. But I suspect it may not even be as long as 45 minutes. But anyway, another announcement. After the 10th episode, I'm looking to go live so that everybody can join in on chat and whatnot. And that'll be every Monday at 4 p.m. as long as there's no technical difficulty. Now, when I try to go ahead and record the third episode today for the first time, my computer completely shut down on me. So as long as we don't have any more of that, we should start at 4 p.m. every Monday, no problem. But by the time I go and do the live show, I'm thinking about starting another day of the podcast where I'm thinking about looking at the headlines of the week and analyzing them and going over them and kind of giving what I think about it and where moral issues may arise. But anyway, like I said, today the theme is the necessity of God and fighting injustice. And to begin, I want to go over the intro biblical verse that I read at the beginning of the show. So again, that was 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, and it goes, "So put away all malice and all deceit and all hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifice acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." Okay, so I kind of want to break it down, go over what that verse means, and go over the implications of what it means for the human in this verse. You know, what does it mean to be human? And so, going over the first part, we have, of course, the non-aggression principle, or a wiping away of what makes us incredulous. That gives us no credit. So put away all your malice and all your deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander. Of course, to become a better person, to become a good, individual, we have to put away all the things that are bad, of course, and all the things that made us an evil individual. Of course, we have to, we can't just totally reject it and say it didn't happen. We have to put it away. Of course, recognize you did wrong, but you have to put that evil away. And the second part, like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. Of course, you should renew yourself. Make yourself into a new person. Don't, like I said, don't continue to be, an evil person. If you truly want to grow your consciousness, if you truly want to be a good person, you got to, be a newborn infant, basically, and look for the pure spiritual milk. And that's the necessity of God, because without this spiritual milk, without checking ourselves psychologically, we cannot become better people. And you might think, what does my psychology have to do with my spirituality? Why is it that if I'm to become a better spiritual person, why do I have to change myself psychologically? Become a better person in this mundane world. Well, in most spiritual philosophies, the mind, body, and spirit are disconnected, but they work as one spiritual entity. Mark Passio, he covers it beautifully in his natural law talks. He talks about how the mind, body, and spirit work together to be one harmonious spiritual entity. That through the mind, the spirit or the Holy Spirit or the spirit of the Creator or spiritual energy, spiritual power, comes through the mind, in which the mind analyzes it and discerns what's good and what's not good, and then acts upon it. The action is the most, important part. And if you don't realize that the spiritual is not connected with the mind or the body, then you have a improper spirituality. You have a broken spirituality. Even Carl Jung, a famous psychiatrist, the man who created analytical psychology, he said, it's funny whenever, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but he says it's funny whenever Westerners hear something is psychological and think it only to be psychological. Let me say that again. He finds it funny that Westerners, when they hear the word psychological, that it only means psychological. So that implies that Jung understood that if something is psychological, something is mental, it's also a spiritual thing. And it's going to, of course, affect you in your physical life. Your mental subconscious and your spiritual body will show in your physical life. Well, anyway, and then the second part of this line, like a newborn infant, long for the pure spiritual milk. The second part of that line, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. That's that's a sign of one of the spiritual gifts of the Lord, of course, is the gift of discernment, discerning whether something comes from God or something comes from evil. So that shows that as we become better people, as we grow spiritually, we grow in spiritual gifts, we grow in discernment, we grow in wisdom. You have to truly know that the Lord is good to unlock these things. This has to be a genuine thing. And then the third part. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. This is one of the most profound parts, I think, of this biblical verse. Because, God created us, as it says in Genesis, that he created us from dirt, and that we were just a mold, a rocky mold, until God breathed into us the breath of life, and it gave us a living spirit. But then, of course, Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and then that's when the body started dying, and that's where the disconnection, I believe, or metaphorically, if you will, that the spirit, that the mind, body, and spirit had disconnected, and that it became a mission for us to, again, reconnect these three parts into one. Sounds a lot like the Trinity, doesn't it? Well, that has a lot to do with connecting the mind, body, and spirit. But I'm not going to get into that yet, because that's in the later part of the podcast. So, as you become more ideally good, you become more of a living, being. So, you're not just being a part of the mold. You're not being part of everybody else. You're not doing what everyone else is. You're thinking for yourself. You're becoming an individual. You're becoming more authentic. When you become more authentic, when you become more authentically good, that's a huge phrase right there. Authentically good, and you can't just force yourself to be good. You can force yourself to be good all day, and it'll become a huge frustration. You got to understand why you got to be good. You got to understand how it creates order, and how there is a spiritual law behind the kindness, what it does. And so what it does, it makes you into a more authentic, happy person. You see, God doesn't want you to live under a law and just, live out your life and do nothing. No. He wants you to be an authentic person. He wants you to be precious in his sight. And, how you're precious in his sight, you have to be worth something, right? Well, give yourself some worth. Which leads us into the last part. And it says, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So, you yourselves are stones, but you're living stones, you're spiritual stones. You're not literally building a church, a physical church. You could be, that's fine. Build your physical church. But know that the church begins in the mind. The church begins in the heart, and the emotions, and the psychology of the people. Think about that. Because if you have a church built on falsehood, then all it is an empty house. There's no spirit in it. And that's why in the verse it calls us all to be a part of the priesthood, to be priests, not to be a layman, not to sit back and to just go to that job every day, not to just get the money and go about our life, but no, to actually mean something, to actually do something, to actually make an effect in this world, to pick up that microphone and, spread knowledge, or turn on that camera and talk to the people, or write that book, or, write that poetry, speak to someone. But do it in truth and knowledge, and do it out of goodness. Don't do it out of selfishness, don't do it out of hypocrisy and lies. And that's a huge thing, because at the beginning of the verse it says, lay down your hypocrisy, lay down your lies, your deceit, everything like that. Because there will be deceivers. There will be ones that will tell you that